Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Great. Well, welcome. My name is Chris Bale. I'm the co-director of the Polarization Lab, the director of the Society-Centered AI Initiative, and a member of the Sociology Department. And we are all jointly hosting this wonderful talk by Sebastian Villamizar Santamaria. And, this is just such a wonderful opportunity for all of us to learn about something I'm pretty sure everyone in the audience would like to do, which is to learn how to publish in Nature, right? We should all be so lucky. But before I'm sure you'll say a little bit about your background in the course of the talk, but I want to highlight a few things that I think will be of particular interest to the social scientists in the room. So Sebastian comes from a really unique background, both sociology and geography, having studied at Universidad del Rosario in Colombia, which for those of you who know our summer institutes in computational social science was the location of the inaugural Summer Institute in Computational Social Science in Colombia. Also geography, and has written at CUNY, which for those of you who don't know is a really remarkable department, which is known for strengths in many, many areas, especially urban planning and immigration, and wrote a wonderful dissertation, which turned into a book about various themes related to gentrification and environmental activism and other topics in Colombia. So as a scholar, he's really, I can imagine why a place like Nature wants to hire you, because you have such range, so, and I know looking at many of you, and I don't know all of you, but looking around, I can see at least, I think 5 or 6 different disciplines represented. So we want to hear from Sebastian today and not me, so I don't want to say too much more, except to say that I think we can learn many things from him about publishing in Nature, but also about different career paths for academics. We were discussing this at dinner last night. I think you're open to a range of different questions. Unfortunately, we somehow managed to forget to put lunch in his schedule, so I will insist that we give him at least a few minutes to eat as he's fielding questions. So thank you so much, Sebastian, for coming. We're so honored to have you here, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, thank you everyone for being here despite all the challenges in the weather. Thank you for hosting me, Chris. Sunshine, thank you a lot for providing me the space, all the things that have been happening. Thank you, Haley, as well. And so I want to start by not repeating what Chris just said about my trajectory. I think it's, the one thing that I want to say is my training as a social scientist has been widely in different disciplines. I also did some applied research before with Andres, who's here. Also, we worked in the same NGO before we went to our PhD routes. And during that time, I was able to connect with different folks from different disciplines. So although my training is in these areas, I did a lot of things with different people that were very challenging sometimes, but very enriching. And this is something that we will discuss a little bit later in terms of interdisciplinary reach questions and things that are happening. So the structure of the talk is really, I have more than a few slides just to give you a sense of the background of the journal, kind of where we are, what we're looking for. Then give you some examples of published papers that we've done in the past year, mostly when the expansion was kind of more robust. And then give you a sense of the other journals in the Nature portfolio because we have a lot of them, so you can see where things fit in what sense. And then hopefully have a longer time for questions and comments that you all have. So again, thanks for being here. So who are we? Nature and the Nature portfolio is, it's been a long time since we've been around. Nature is one of the oldest journals in the world. And since 1869, you see that there might have been others, but they didn't survive. There are others that are still around, like the Lancet and the New England Journal of Medicine. And Nature was, it was a British thing at the beginning. Then Science came after, a few years after, which is mostly based in the US. So there were the 2 larger general journals. And for Nature, you see, this is the cover of the first issue, if I'm not mistaken. We want to do 2 things. The first one is to publish really good, high quality science that advances our understanding about what's happening in the world. Of course, at the beginning, it was mostly geared towards the biophysical sciences, but and that's why I'm here now to expand into the social sciences. But then also that there's enough coverage and exposure outside of science, so that the general public knows what it is that we're doing, kind of what's the state of things that are happening. So the journal still today has a magazine section and a research section. So I am an editor in the research aspect of this. My colleagues in the other section, in the more in the journalistic side, have also, they're independent teams. So sometimes you might have seen that there's a comment or a worldview. Those are more related to like op-eds that you see in a traditional newspaper that are written by scientists or people thinking about science, and news features that are handled by this other team. And then what we do in my team, which is the actual bread and butter article analysis, reviews, perspectives, that I can talk more about these different formats later. But so you see, we're still a physical hard copy journal, which is nice. If you want to see the covers, there's a huge deal. If you want to look at different things that have been going on, what has been published, they're really nice visuals of what's going on. And then there's something also physical that, as you see, like I'm still analog in many ways. Again, the journal is divided in these two teams. As I was saying, the Nature magazine content, who is in charge of news, comments, etc. And then there's the research part, which is divided into two teams, the physical sciences and the biological sciences. You'll see that there's no social science there because we're part of the bio team, for organizational reasons. So there's 25 editors in biology, and maybe 26 now. I think this is an older slide before we hired new people, and then 15 physics editors. We all handle different fields, right? So I'm in charge of social sciences, which is broadly sociology, geography, political science, economics, some parts of economics, education studies, and also some digital humanities. And that's why we're here. But if you also have questions about of the other sciences that are covered here, like socio-environmental questions, like we discussed earlier, or more in the computer AI, human interaction spaces, that's also something that we handle, and that we make these decisions with the team. So Nature is a different kind of journal from most of the academic journals because of a few things. And it's the one main difference, I think, is that we're professional editors. We're full-time editors. We have scientific training. We all have PhDs in our fields. We had a career before in that space, but then we moved to this editorial space. And that gives us, an understanding of methods, questions, disciplinary debates, etc., but also gives us some independent, some kind of independent position that is not tied to an institution or, disciplinary beefs that might happen in some spaces. We're not representing any of those camps. So we try to be, a space where we are open to approaches, methodological or theoretical, or even, interdisciplinary approaches, and so on. But we also retain our close ties to the community, like what I'm doing right now. We go to conferences to also be aware of what's going on in the field, what are the discussions that are happening, and visits to universities so we can have a more one-on-one session with scholars and professors. And this is something also that is important to highlight. And what we like to do is that we tend to see the significance of the research more than the credit of who's writing it, who's the institution that is part of these people. And I say that as someone who came from the Global South, working in Global South institutions before coming to the US. I know, and then like an ESL or ETL, non-third language speaker, that is, we know, I'm aware of the inequalities that are happening in the world of publishing. So that's something that I take seriously in this space, to be open to submissions, ideas, topics, etc. from different places. And as I've mentioned in some of our one-on-ones, to me at least, what I like to see about papers is the potential of them more than the shortcomings, because it's an important part of what the paper can be. What gets submitted at the beginning changes inevitably through revision. We cannot predict what's going to happen at the beginning because it's a process that moves along. So that's why we focus on these larger questions that I'll tell you in a minute. So what are we looking for when we assess papers? And some of you that I've had this talk before know already what I'm going to say. But the first thing is that the initial format doesn't matter. Nature has a very specific format that for historical reasons come from these biophysical sciences. They're very short in comparison to social science articles, between 4,000 to 5,000 words. In American Journal of Sociology, it's like 8,000 to 10,000 words. So it's almost half of what's going on. So at the initial stage, the format doesn't matter for us because, again, we want to see what's the message behind the format can change, but the message is something that comes at the beginning. But we do look for three main things. I've mentioned them with different words, but you'll see what I'm saying here. The first one is the scope. We are a generalist audience journal. So that means that we want to have things that are of interest to a larger group, not only a disciplinary debate, but also something that others can see, understand, and take with that. So is the advance more incremental? So it might be better geared to a disciplinary journal or a topical journal, or is it wide that others might be interested? Then the second thing is the advance, or in another way to put it is the contribution. Is this a conceptual advance, or are you advancing a different way of understanding a concept that has been going on? Is this an evidence-based advance or a confirmation of a theory, a different case study that hasn't been studied before? And is it a valuable resource? So many of you design your own databases or collect your own data and are doing collecting and designing research that it would be useful for others as well. Or is it a more practical advance? So, doing something easier or better or cheaper, what it is, that's the practical relevance. Or is it about a pressing thing that's happening? We have, for I'm sure very obvious reasons, you would see, we've had an uptick on submissions about AI in education, AI in politics, AI in things, right? So these are things that are happening in the world that we need to understand. The third criterion is the strength of evidence. And that means that if you have methods, data that are enough to support the argument that you're making, right? So this doesn't mean that you need to have a multi-country longitudinal, decades of survey. No, I mean, we do take and consider those, but it's not a necessary condition. We also publish single country studies or, maybe nationally representative studies and things that are, a little bit more bounded, but that they really rely on, or rather that the argument really relies on those data. And sometimes, it means that the data doesn't match the claim, and that's one of the reasons also for a rejection. We can certainly talk about it later. And then the journal policy concerns that we have, right? It's the IRB approved, right? And if so, in what cases, right? If it's an IRB approval from an institution based in a different country where the research is done, so what do we do with this information, right? Is the data going to be available? Is the code available for reviewers and for the general public? Consent from participants, all these things that, and now, an AI policy regarding the use of LLMs in research and so on. So the type of advances that we consider are and you can see there. Is it a new field or a novel insight in an existing field? That usually comes, for example, with a new method approach that comes from another discipline that is now applied to a particular case or a particular question. Is it a debate that people want to insert themselves in? And if it's a debate, is something that is being challenged? It's something that is being confirmed? What is the position that is advanced in this debate? Is this a resource or a new method? So we do take and consider methodological papers. And for those, we would need to see, what is it that it's bringing compared to existing methods. So benchmarking those methods is really important for us to have the comparison. There's also a question about the practical relevance of the results. So, there's a big interest in policy, evidence-based policy research as well. Or, is somebody who has not been part of a discussion or a topic being affected by this, or is a large part of the population? What's going on? Who's benefiting from the research in the end? And is this a large data set or rare samples, a case that has been understudied? What it is that it's making the contribution more empirical? Some examples of primary research. I don't know if the QR codes are still working, so if anybody's going to check that, let me know and I can update them. But you'll have the titles there. We have published, and I mean Nature by its own self, not the research journals, but Nature as the journal itself. We've published more social sciences in the past few years. Again, historically, the journal has been focused on biophysical sciences, but for about 15 to 18 years, we first expanded into more of the neurological space, psychology. Then for about 5 to 7 years, we did more stuff in the behavioral psychology space, more in the behavioral economics space as well. And then in my role that has been there for about a year and a half is geared towards expanding into these other more structural institutional disciplines, like again sociology, political science, etc. So this is one of the latest papers that we published in this field that you'll see. It's about AI, as I was mentioning. A lot of people are talking about AI. This one is about persuading voters, and I don't need to repeat what the abstract is, but it's a good example to look at the type of the strength of evidence needed for a claim. So if the claim is about persuading how chatting with an LLM changes your voting preferences, we would need to see how it changes in different aspects, not only in one experimental setting, but different ones, right? Another example is this one that was published it's like 6 months ago, on the gender gap in math. So this is a British journal, so that's why it says maths, right? And this one comes from economics of education, and this is looking at with a very large national sample of all the kids in primary school in France, and they start to track when do girls and boys' performance start to diverge. And it's a very terrible finding. After 4 months of education, formal education, you start to see the gap. And so this has practical and policy implications, right? What is it about teacher interactions? What is it about the curriculum? Where, how are we making gender stereotypes around these things? So it shows, again, a different example of the relevance of the paper. This is one of the first ones in this larger space that we've published. Some of you also might know this, on social capital. This was a study that was used in partnership with Facebook data. And so, a data set that didn't exist before, that people just had to have access for different reasons. They managed to get it. So the findings, are about different measurements of social capital and how they're constructed online and offline. And this is a good example for another thing that I want to say, that there's a second part of this paper. And things that were unsaid or that were left open in the first one, they managed to do a second version of this, right? And the first one, again, it's association with economic mobility, and this one is economic connectedness. So different parts of a project. So we don't have to have everything in a single paper, right? We have to have, again, enough evidence to make it strong for the argument. But we certainly take, revision or like revisiting of data sets and papers that happen there. Another one that I wanted to show you here is one that is in the digital humanities space, kind of. So this is a history paper at its core, but it comes from epidemiologists and network scientists. And what they're doing is that they're looking at records that historians have made for a long time, of towns in revolutionary France, and they know when a social, like a civil unrest happened, how many people, etc. And they applied this contagion model to study how rumors spread and how the revolution in the end spread. So this is something that historians have studied for many decades, but it's applying a novel method into an existing consensus and knowledge. Then I mentioned that we also publish things that are not purely empirical advances. This one is perspective. Perspective pieces are more long form opinion or essay pieces that are looking to propose a research avenue to, there might be something that we don't know right now that we should know right now, and they are proposing how we know it. Perspective pieces and reviews, I'll tell you what those are in a second, are mostly commissioned that we do, but we also take unsolicited perspectives. So if you're interested in those, you can also approach me and we can talk about it. And reviews, which are the other format that I'm mentioning, are, if you're familiar with the annual reviews of journals, that's more of that kind of aim of a literature review that discusses the advances of a concept, a debate, a technique, and how we got here. So I always use this example of, if you think of an hourglass, a review is the top part. It tells us, all these debate, who's who, what's going on, and how we got into this space. And perspectives are the bottom part. Okay, this is the starting point, and what do we do with this information? So these are, again, theoretically driven papers. They don't rely on data or data analysis, but only secondary sources. So they're very useful to kind of take stock, reflect on a field, propose new questions or new ways to do things. So just to summarize this, the ideal paper for us, it's a striking scientific or practical advance, which could mean has many meanings, as I mentioned at the beginning. Is supported by strong evidence and has a story that can be told without too many methodological details. Why? Because the methods section is a separate part of the paper. So it needs to have everything that somebody can just read in the actual thing and understand what it is. And those who want to replicate it, understand more about the specifics, can refer to the methods. So how do submissions work? Again, no formal requirements at the beginning, but this is at the end, if it passes through review, et cetera, it needs to fit here. So, might as well start thinking about it at the beginning. Between 4,000 to 5,000 words, 4 to 5 main figures, 10 extended data figures, and all the supplementary information details that you want to have. So useful, for example, for context, more about the ethics of the research, other figures, other robustness, sensitivity checks, all of these things can go in that space. Why is that restriction? Because again, this is a printed journal. So the page is really precious for many, money reasons and others. So it's very limited in that sense, but then the online version can have as many of the things as you want. So this is, again, long enough to tell the story that you want to say, but also explain it enough for the referees to see it and understand what's going on and assess it. And again, get the point across so that anybody who might not be an expert can look at this and see what do we do with this information, right? The methods should be as complete as possible. Again, they're separate. So all the regressions that you're putting there, all the variables can be described, the sample, all these things are there, but also IRB protocols. If it's a case study, then more things about the case. We also require authors to provide all the quantification possible for what they're saying. So the ends of the samples, the stats. So if you're saying, this is a difference between there's no difference between the two groups that you're comparing, so that there's enough, statistical difference or not. What are we talking about here? But there's enough relevant demographic details and so on to give us a quantification as much as possible of what is being said. Then we also require things like the data availability statement, the code availability statement, and conflict of interest for transparency reasons and for replication reasons. So if you have data that you collected, is it going to be available for researchers? If so, under what circumstances, or is it going to be open for everyone? The code also, so people can go and check if the things, and reviewers too, go and see if what you said you did is exactly what is outside. So this is, I think it's a question that social scientists have been more serious about in the last few years, about replication. There's not a lot of revisiting in our fields, but now there's more interest in making these things very clear. And of course, conflict of interest. If there's a funding agency that gave you the money for the research and it's saying something about that agency, if you have a specific thing that you need to disclose to be as transparent as possible in the reflexivity and the positionality of the researchers. Consent, if you did with human participants, to have them there so that all the ethics are very well supported. And if you have a pre-registration, that's fine. We don't think that dents the novelty of a paper. But if it's pre-registered in any of the repositories, to give us the thing, if it deviated from the protocol, to also disclose it, and how and in what cases. So 2 things to remember. The first one is that someone has to read the manuscript. So writing can be a very lonely thing, in the sense of like very personal thing, right? You're with the screen, you're writing the thing, but somebody else is the one who's going to read it, not you. So make things as clear as possible. If you have, people that can, if you have a writing group, all these things are very useful. The writing center is always very useful. And I say that as someone who worked at the writing center at CUNY. It's very important to do that. And also because then, the editors and reviewers will need to see this as well, especially reviewers. They always ask for clarifications. So if you have those before, it would be great. And, this is also something, as you all know, or some of you know, you get however many requests to review every week a paper. So the strongest the initial submission is, the less work there is during review. So that's also something that would be important to have when you're writing it. Not a consideration for us, of course, but just to think about the pressures of all the time constraints that you all have. Then a few things very, operational. Then the abstract is, I left the econ summary there, but some of you who are more familiar with econ know that that's true. But, an abstract that is between 200 and 230 words is great. It's referenced. It's also a difference from other journals. The intro is very short. And so we don't have a specific lead review section, but it has to be in the introduction. What's the debate? What's the gap? What do we know? What's the state of the field, or the question, and how are we filling that gap? Then it's the results section. So this is also very different. The methods come at the end, because again, those are for a more specialist audience. So ideally, the results are first and the methods. And we always get that all the time. During review, somebody comments and says, the structure is weird. Why are the methods in the end? Authors, please correct them. And we have to tell them, no, this is a formatting thing. So then comes the results with the brief summary of the methods, just to give enough to know what you did. And then refer to the method section at the end. Then with the findings, you have the main story, the main evidence, but anything else should be supplementary. So if you run robustness checks or sensitivity checks, they probably should go in the supplementary information, but then you say in the main text, like, we did these checks, please refer to supplementary information 3.1 or whatever. So that all these other supplemental kind of stats, calculations, context, things that are needed to understand the finding are easily accessible. Then the next section is the discussion that just says, again, what do we do with this information? What does this contribute to the literature? Or how do we make sense of the findings? And the conclusion with the limitations, we also were talking about this yesterday, but we need to know what's the extent of the claim, right? What's the reach of the claim? And then the methods, there's no word or page limit, can be quite detailed, but you can only, just do what is relevant for the paper, right? And there's no need to describe what is a regression. Just say we did this OLS, whatever, right? No need to be super detailed there. And those about robustness, etc., can be in the extended data. One thing that we do that not many journals do either is that we take pre-submission inquiries. These are a way for authors to test the waters, to see if a paper that they're writing is in scope or not, or what it would need to be in scope. So if you're unsure, send a pre-submission through the system. That's the easiest and fastest route for you to know if we would be, if we would be interested in it, and if so, if it needs something else. We are pretty fast on those. I would say more now 2 to 3 days, but we work on them as they come along. What it just needs the cover letter that situates the research, kind of summarizes what you did, what are the findings, etc. The abstract, and if you have a specific figure or something that you want to show that encapsulates the main finding. If you have the full paper, just submit the full paper, because we tend, it takes about 1 week for us to send initial first decisions. So if you already have it written, it's only a few more days that you need to wait, but these are very useful for when you're finishing writing the paper. And then the outcome of a pre-sub is that we say a firm no or a soft yes, because of course there's limited information that you provide, so we need to read the full paper and then we screen it for what I said at the beginning. And you can always email me if you want to discuss something. I'm available. Again, we're full-time editors, so this is what we do. We would like to talk. We read you a lot, but we don't talk to you a lot. So it would be nice to also have these more real-time interactions. And when everybody now it's asking this more and more, is for you to, if you're doing a pre-sub, to please do it through the website, through the manuscript portal, not through email, just because it gets recorded in the system. If, for example, I'm away and I get cover, somebody else can look at this and you don't have to wait for me, and so on. So doing through that, it's easier. For preprints, if as I was saying, we do allow deposition of papers in servers and NBR or Social Archive, whatever it is that you use, that's fine. There's also this opt-in for automatic preprint server deposition through InReview. That's something that is tied to Nature, but it's an external thing. So if you're interested in that, there's specific instructions when you submit to do it. And we don't think that preprints are scoops. That's also very important. People, for open science reasons, for many reasons, put them out there. And sometimes we go through the preprint services to invite papers that we think would be interesting for us. So that's also another way to get editors' attention. Now, because there are so many journals in the Nature portfolio, what we can do, every journal is independent. They have their own group of editors. We don't really talk a lot about papers unless we do a consultation and transfer. So for example, there might be a paper that comes to us, but it doesn't satisfy some of these criteria, but we think it's a very robust paper that is well done. So we consult with another journal to see if they would take it as is. And then for that, we share our notes, the files, and if it went after review, that we rejected after review, we can also consult with other journals to see if they would take it with those caveats. And that's if of course the authors give consent. It's not that we do it just in the post review. It's very useful because then you'll have the full trajectory of this, and if you have the chance to resubmit and work on this thing for another journal for sure, right? Instead of being a bet. And it's done through the system. There's no need to do anything. It's just a few clicks. And yeah, again, we can when we consult these papers, our colleagues would say, yes, we'll send it out to review as is, or we will send it out to review with this caveat, or no, and then we can try with another journal. So why? Because there's at least 47 Nature titles, and this was last year. There's 3 more journals that were launched this year, I believe. All sorts of things in the biophysical sciences, not that many things in the social sciences. I would just highlight a few. Nature Human Behavior. I think some of you might know this already, or be familiar with that journal. It also publishes lots of social science research. It again started, as the name suggests, more in the behavioral space, but they also consider other things, from archaeology to demography to other stuff that we also consider. But that's the other large general journal. But if you're doing specific research that is more topical, let's say, there's, for example, Nature Sustainability or Nature Climate Change, for those of you who are doing more socio-environmental work. There's Nature Cities, where I was before, that is doing all sorts of urban research. And sometimes I've had transfers from physicists that are writing something more social, but it's not for us. But then I send it to Nature Physics as well, so it doesn't have to be like a very specific discipline equals journal, but more about what the paper is about. Nature Ecology and Evolution, also for those of you doing socio-environmental stuff. And then the other one that I would like to highlight is Nature Communications, which is also a very general journal, but it considers more incremental advances more than us. So if you have something that is more disciplinary in that sense, or at an advance that is a little bit narrower, that's a good paper for a good journal for it. The Nature Reviews papers that you see there, they're well, I don't know if many apply, but those are mostly commissioned only. So that's why we have reviews, as I mentioned before. So that's, if you're interested in writing one of those, should go through here. And Nature Communications is at the bottom, but it's closed. It's obscure there. What's the difference? It's because there's so many. You can go up this thing based on selectivity for impact and broad appeal. So again, Nature and the Nature research journals, the ones with the last name, have the highest selectivity, and editing too, because there's fewer papers that go along. And then you have all the others that are more topical or more incremental down the line. And scientific reports, which is also more, we tend to describe this as a newspaper, as a physical newspaper. You have the front page, which would be Nature. Then you have the different sections, the business section, those would be the research journals. And then you have more of the topical or ads, very specific. It will matter for a community that really needs this information. It might not have the broadest interest, but it's still, somebody will need to know this. So we have a few minutes, so sorry if I rushed through things, but I just want to hear more about what, questions that you have, things that you want to discuss. My email is there. I'm available, as I mentioned. If you want to chat, you want to schedule more one-on-ones, etc., please spread the word also with your colleagues, with other people. And then we can open now. Here I'm open to questions that you have about the submission process, about the scope, about the writing process too, whatever it is, I'm here. So thank you.
Sorry, it's not Sebastian. Sorry. Thank you very much. You mentioned the pre-submission inquiry is it sounded a little bit like a matter of convenience, like you haven't yet written up maybe the whole appendix, and so better to get some initial feedback before doing the full submission. Is that the right way to understand it, or are there other things that could be communicated, like, for example, you need to run another experiment, or you need to include another case study? What's the typical kind of feedback you guys would give at that stage?
Yeah, so we have kind of three categories of answers to pre-subs. One is yes, as is. One is yes, but, and the other is no. Very rarely we do the first and the third. We usually do the second. And we say what it would need. So we would say, for example, we appreciate this part of the paper, but we are concerned about the mechanistic insight that you're doing. Or we think that this would need a different case or a different experiment, or, for example, for papers that are usually about perception, we say we would need some outcomes. That's a perception. So we tend to provide as much as a quick feedback can be provided for authors to know what it would need. And sometimes we also offer the option to chat. So it might be easier for us to communicate some of these things in knowing what the other people are interested in and what it's feasible. We also understand that there's limitations, funding, time, all these other things. So that also is part of the consideration after pre-sub. Yes. So we tend to suggest journals in the transfer after a pre-sub no. For example, we would say, we think this would be a good fit for this other journal. Not all of them take pre-subs, so it's a bit of a case by case, what the topic is and what the journal recommended is. I don't know if it's an automatic rejection, but we would already have some, screened some of the things that we looked for. So the paper needs to be very different in a way, or, the pre-sub was not communicated well or for that. So through the system, we can see the decisions, right? The history of a paper. Something that I didn't talk about here, but it also would be useful, is that if you still would like to submit a paper after any kind of rejection, whether it's a pre-sub no or a desk rejection or a post-review rejection, there's an appeal process, and authors can request to open an appeal. And for that, there's specific steps there on the website, but essentially you provide a new cover letter saying why the original assessment was wrong with these reasons. And if it's a post-review appeal, it needs to have the point-by-point response to referees, and the new version of the paper that does the thing that was said in the cover letter that was going to change. So those are available. Everybody can request an appeal. Again, the process is for people to tell the editor, we want to do this, and then we submit the link, etc., so people can upload the files and so on. And so everything is linked, and we can see the decisions that were done before. Also useful, for example, if somebody is on vacation or something and was not part of the original submission, and so they can also see what the discussion was in the previous version, etc., etc. Yes.
The procedural question. So you mentioned that the printed version is usually shorter than the online version. Is the author expected to provide like two drafts, one for the print version and one for the online version?
No. So there will be different documents, part of the same submission. So you have the main part of the paper. So it will have the intro and then the abstract, all these things. And then if you have any supplementary information, there will be separate files. So if it's accepted, the production team knows what goes where. So there's a lot of formatting things requests that happen in the accept stage. As I mentioned, the stats, like these kinds of things, the quantification, so there's always a lot of changes that are done in the last step. And then production knows what goes where, and copy editors also know what to work on.
So you hinted at the beginning of the hour. What is your stance on disciplinary work versus interdisciplinary work?
Well, we are a generalist journal, right? So for us, that means that interdisciplinary advances are usually what we are looking for because they are satisfying the idea of the broader appeal, right? That can mean many things. That can mean, for example, the list of references that or the debates that people are engaging with, right? If it's skewed towards one discipline or another, then maybe the question that people are asking is very disciplinary. That doesn't mean we wouldn't take it, right? But it just would be about the limitations and kind of the reach that are happening. Yes, but not exclusively. Yeah.
I got a question about experiments specifically. I think you mentioned something about the experimental outcome and like real outcomes. Did I should mention that? So I was wondering regarding experiments, particularly, I guess, within economics, where like you create a hypothetical situation and then people decide, but then it's not an actual decision they're taking, it's just hypothetical. What is the kind of like the reaction to that kind of work?
Thanks. No, that is something that we deal with on a weekly basis, really, because we get a lot of submissions that have what I call kind of the chapter one finding. It sets up an interesting finding that is based on either a simulation or a more experimental setting. It can be very robust. It can be with all the bells and whistles of the experimental design. But that's kind of as far as the story goes, right? And for us to consider it further, we would need to have either outcomes or causal mechanisms that help us put this in a larger context of external validation. So I think your example was really good. It's like, okay, we have these people interacting with ChatGPT and like they have this thing and people get persuaded to vote, just to use that example before, they get persuaded to vote one way or another, but how do we know if they're actually going to vote for the other, right? So what that means is that they would need to have another, it could be another experiment, but in a different setting, right? Or a different case or country or something like that, that helps with the validation. But if the claim is about behavior, so for example, you interact with ChatGPT and your perception changes about something, we would need to see proof of the change in a different, in real life, let's say, right? And yeah, so it could be an experimental design or, parts of this. Of course, we cannot know if people really vote for someone, like it's impossible, but there are other ways to do it. So for example, those, especially economics, there's like the what is it called, the dictator game, and the others that are about fund, like donation-based things that people who fill out the survey get $3 and they decide to donate whatever, right? So there's ways that we can see that outcome component that we would need to consider it further. Yes.
Yeah, thank you for being here. You alluded to an increase in submissions related to artificial intelligence, and that made me wonder, it seems like there's sort of a face value pitch for the advance that comes with work related to AI, and I wondered how you were thinking about picking work that's really relevant for the journal's audience and that demonstrates a real advance in this context.
Well, I don't know if there's a preference for AI. I don't think that's, yeah, no, I think none of us consider it more favorably than non-AI papers, or about AI rather, right? Especially because there's so much happening in that space that our bar has increased as we learn more, both as as scientists that are working on that and things, but also us as editors that get submitted all sorts of papers using or studying AI. More, I don't know if using, but studying AI, right? So because it's a rapidly changing space, there are certain considerations that we have at some point, but they might change down the line. So a good example of that is that people are testing a specific version of ChatGPT, and they see that it has this behavioral component and but then OpenAI rolls out a new version, and we don't know if the algorithm changed or not, or like what happened with that claim or that setting that was part of the premise or the assumption premise of the experiment before. So does that mean that we don't consider that? No, but it's something that we need to keep in mind for the limitations and for the things. So if it's, for example, testing an AI version that is very outdated, then that's also something. Okay, so why we have a new version of this? We don't know if what you're finding is what is happening right now. And of course, the review process takes a long time. Things might change during the review process, and in those cases, well, it started before, so that has that benefit. But if it's a submission, that is more, I guess, retrospective in that sense, it needs to be very mindful of those changes and limitations. And then something might happen, and there's a new AI, and like, whoops, sorry. And there's a new AI that changes the whole thing, a different company, whatever, right? So, the state of knowledge was that at some point, and then it will change, and then we'll have the papers that are looking at the new state of knowledge. So yeah, it's a balance there between timeliness and limitations of access.
Thanks so much for sharing your insights. A question about actually follow up with Chris' question. So if we do a full summation with the manuscript, cover letter, and also all the other things, so what's the process in the editorial office? Do you actually look at the paper, or you look at the cover letter before you actually dig into the details for the manuscript?
Oh, we read everything.
Wow.
Yeah. We look at the cover letter and the main argument and the main text, and if there's supplementary information, we also look at that, because we make make notes of papers that are discussed with the other editors. So decisions are made with the relevant editors. So for example, to go back to AI, the AI social papers are reviewed or read, assessed initially by, it could be me if it's more social, it could be one of my colleagues if it's more in the computation space, but then we discuss things, or the conservation papers, there's an editor specific in charge of ecology, etc. So she might read those, but if it's a social component, then I will also be part of the decision. So for that, we need the notes, and to get the notes and read the paper, we need to, there might be specific parts that were not part of the note, but that are relevant for my remit, for example. So I go to the paper and read it if I'm not the primary editor. And if I'm the primary editor, then I'll, read the whole thing. And because people put a lot of effort and work into these things. So I want to be as respectful as possible to people's time and effort in giving a decision.
Hi, just this question is because we have such because we're stuck in our own disciplines, and this is a generalist or a journal. We might not know what other disciplines might be interested in the things that we do. So the answer to this question might be no, but do you have any idea or intuition about the things that we could be sending your way that you would like to see, but we simply are not, like as sociologist or political scientist?
Well, I mean, I think co-authorship is really important. So if you have co-authors from other disciplines, they might provide that insight. So that means go to other departments, taking seminars or whatever from other people, hosted by others, so you can start making those things. Another way to do it is not read the disciplinary journals only, and make a search that is wider than that, so that you see the advance. In terms of topics, I don't have specific topics that I would like to see more of, that we haven't, I mean, I have many topics that I would like to see more of that we haven't published, many, but we still get those submitted. But it's a question of these other criteria, how they're. So co-authorship, I think, is a good one. Reading other disciplines, the journals from other places, and it's another one that can be done. And just doing like a check after you write the paper, and just look at your list of references and see where the journals are. And it can give you also another way of see how skewed towards one silo or the other it might be.
I think we're out of time, and we still haven't let you eat lunch.
Oh, no.
So I'm going to insist that we wrap up. One more question?
One more question.
You're willing? Great.
Oh, there's 2 more questions. Okay.
You have time, Sebastian.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Folks have to leave, I think, Sebastian.
Yeah.
I already have the microphone, so I'm going to ask mine first. Will you pass that over? One of the things that I often advise people new to publishing is to entirely separate from the content of their own paper, is to really look at publications for structure, and like the language and the transitions and so on. And that is really different in a general science journal compared to a disciplinary journal. And so not that you have to answer right now, but I think something that might be really useful would be is if you had some specific articles in mind as ones that, again, separate from the topic, but just like that do a really nice job of articulating contribution, of having a nice flow, of just having that feel and content. That it would be something that I know that many of our graduate students would really appreciate.
Great. No, I think partly the selection of these papers that I put here is because of that, because I think they exemplify a way to do this. So this one, different new discipline, different methods of new methods to an old discipline. That's one way, and this could be an example. This one about follow-ups. This one could be about a novelty concern that we've seen that there's a gender, but this one is more of an empirical advance that with a large sample. So I think these would be my examples that I would do for now. But we need more. So that's why we're here. We have some things in the pipeline that will be published soon that I think would also widen the topics and the methodological approaches. So tune in in a couple of weeks, because there will be things that I hope will be interesting for people.
Hi, hopefully this is a quick one. I noticed in the big list of the different journals within the portfolio that you showed that there's not an epidemiology one. I'm wondering, since it's kind of like at the intersection of life sciences and social sciences, like if people submit epidemiology papers, where in the journals they typically land. I mean, you showed that one that uses epidemiologic methods to study, historical problem, but other papers that just, actually study like infectious diseases, where do those typically land?
So there is an editor, a colleague of mine, that she handles epidemiology and public health. So that is in scope for Nature. There's one that came out, well, the submissions opened last year. So I think the first issue just came out. It's called Nature Health, that they're trying to also to be more in that space. Depending on parts of it, for example, if it's about the behavior of people in a public health setting, it could be nature human behavior. They also consider that. So there's no nature epidemiology, but there's nature health, nature medicine, a little bit to us for sure. And yeah, and then the others depending on how much it fits into the scope.
Thank you.